just generally scared that someday I'd force my mother to take her rose-colored glasses off and see him for what he truly was. But he didn't have any reason to worry because after the way my mother had spoken to me, when I tried to tell her the truth, she had made sure that I didn't say anything to her at all, beyond that point. In any case, I was so bloody done with my mom that I didn't even bother to argue with her and just said, "Okay," then got up and started packing. My head was pounding with anger while I was packing, and I honestly wanted to wait for Mark to come home so I could punch him in the face. But then I found my mother's spare keys to the locker and had a better idea. I snuck into my mom's room while she was watching television in the living room, grabbed her bag, took out the keys, and then took them away. I also left a note in her purse saying that if she wanted to know where her original keys were, she could talk to Mark about it to make sure that he wouldn't get away with this scot-free. I packed up my stuff, including clothes, books, and other things I needed. When I said goodbye to my mom in the living room, she was shocked. She didn't think I was going to leave that day and had been sitting there watching TV instead of helping me. In spite of the initial shock, she got over super quickly and hugged me goodbye. There was not a single tear in her eye, and neither did she seem unhappy about the situation. It was painfully evident that none of this seemed problematic to her at all. I left the house and boarded the bus that took me to my dad's house, which happened to be far away from my mother's place. It was about 2,000 miles away in the suburbs, which is part of the reason why I used to live with my mom. My dad was still undergoing treatment and had to be in and out of the hospital frequently. He lived with his brother who took care of him. And whenever I visit him, which is almost every week, I try to keep the conversation light and positive so he wouldn't worry too much about me. I missed him, but I also cared about him and his wife way too much, so I had never said anything about Mark or my mother with him. Whenever he'd asked me how I was doing at home and how my mother and her new husband were treating me, I lied to him and tell him that it was all good. But now, I had no choice but to reveal the horrifying truth to him, and I did so without hesitation, because it was crucial for him to be aware of it. I disclosed every detail, including the events of that fateful day. My dad became so furious that his ears actually turned red, a sight I had never witnessed before. I was a little worried that he'd fly off the handle and that wouldn't be good for his health, but he managed to contain himself just to pacify him. I also told him how I'd taken the keys and the note that I left, which would ensure that my mother found out about Mark's leaving. That seemed to make him feel slightly better, and he told me that I was clever for doing that. My dad and my uncle then told me not to worry about anything and said that they were perfectly fine with taking care of me. The one and only reason they'd even agreed to let me move in with my mom full-time was because they thought it would be easier and more convenient for me. But if this was the case, then they'd happily take me back. I was also much happier with my dad and my uncle, so I didn't really mind that my mother had sent me away. On the first day, I didn't hear back from my mother at all, and neither did my father. But the very next day, my mother sent me a video of my sobbing and apologizing to me for whatever had happened. He was begging me to come back, because he'd realized that he'd screwed up by stealing from the woman who'd put her heart and soul into the relationship. My mother texted me saying that this video was supposed to be proof that Mark did feel guilty about whatever he had done and for forcing her to kick me out. My plan had worked, and when she'd noticed the missing keys and the note, she'd confronted Mark about it and he'd been left with no choice but to come out with the truth. I took pleasure in watching him cry. But then my mom texted me, saying she'd only forgive him if I returned. It went from being enjoyable to downright frustrating. She should have realized I'd rather endure hell than go back to that place where I was constantly ignored. I was either invisible or being treated like a burden, and neither of those two choices seemed like something anyone would want to pick from. And for my mother to even leave, the choice to me was ridiculous, because it should have been her choice to end that marriage and apologize to me for what she did. If Mark was the bad guy here, so was she. And probably even worse than Mark, because at least he wasn't related to me. She, being my mom, had kicked me out for another man, and that was unforgivable. It wasn't just Mark who should have been apologizing, but she should also have been regretting what she put me through. Instead, she was treating this as some sort of sick game. I didn't understand why she left the fate of her marriage up to me to be decided, but since she had left it up to me, I chose to say that I wasn't going to come back and she had to leave. Mark. In response to that, she sent me another video of a much calmer but still upset-looking Mark, saying that he understood where I was coming from. But he loved my mom and just needed one last opportunity to prove it to us. He sounded like he was on the verge of tears and was going to stop begging me on his knees any moment now, and that made me feel bad. But I still wasn't convinced, so I said that my decision was final to that. My mother finally replied, saying that I was being way too harsh on both of them. Two supposedly mature adults are desperately begging for my forgiveness, going so far as to endanger their own happiness and marriage just to please me. Yet I callously disregard their efforts and instead strive to distance myself even more. I couldn't bring myself to respond to her message, opting instead to completely ignore it. Astonishingly, she has persistently bombarded me with messages over the past 6 days, desperately attempting to win me back. And every single day there's a video message from her and Mark where they apologize to me for treating me badly. She's told me repeatedly in the videos, unless I agree to come back, she'll file for divorce to prove to me that she's serious. Yesterday, she even told me that she'd been speaking to a lawyer and sent me text to prove that it was true. Mark also looked upset in the video message they sent and begged me to forgive him because he couldn't afford to lose a woman like my mother. I know that I'm destroying their marriage, but to be honest, I feel like whatever my mother is doing is really sick, and I can't bring myself to dignify it with a response of any kind. Not only is she torturing her own husband, but she's also putting me through something very unnecessary,